for 56 years, and 52 of them she has been with the Desert Botanical Gardens. She's explored all sorts of floristics in the Southwest United States and northern New Mexico, with a particular emphasis in the very interesting area of the Grand Canyon. She also explores taxonomy and systematics of agave yucca and Hespericea yucca. She's continued to study and document the region's cactus or cacti and served as coordinator for the cactus family treatment in the Intermountain Flora, and currently is coordinating the Cactus Family of Arizona project with garden research staff and research associates. The rest of the list is will continue forever. She's very accomplished, but even better, she has a very interesting program in store for you. So please welcome Wendy.
Thank you, Erwin. I'm going to share this now. Fingers crossed. You can see that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erwin, for inviting me to talk. And all you Zoomlanders out there, thank you so much for spending a part of your day or maybe night too. It's really, I am very touched. All the people that come from all over the world uh, to hear me speak about a favorite subject. So I would like to share with you a sort of review of our work that I personally started back in the 80s, and also include some new information and new insights too. And so we had the garden has had a very long relationship with the agave family, and of course cacti, ever since the garden was founded in 1939. Of course, focusing on arid, semi-arid plants and the conservation, display, and research of agave and cactus families, and also too published the definitive treatment on these two families. And this is where Howard Scott Gentry comes in. He asked the garden, he got NSF funding, I will complete the monograph on agaves if you give me a building to house my specimens. The garden fortunately agreed and built him a building, which was our first real herbarium space. And he set to work finishing it up. And this is where I come in. If it wasn't for all this happening, I wouldn't be here. Uh, I came out from upstate New York. I used to be a golfer, and I got a golf scholarship at ASU. And this is me playing in a tournament, short hair, short skirts. And so the scholarship, when I had the scholarship, you had to major in PE at ASU. And I think PE is great, but it wasn't for me. I wanted to become a scientist. But the straw that broke the camel's back, or should I say, made me change directions because I wanted to get into wildlife biology, was I had to take pom-pom class. And I just realized there was no way that I could be a pom-pom, take pom-pom class. So anyways, I changed my major, lost the scholarship, and fortunately they changed the rules. And I was able to get the scholarship back. In wildlife biology, I took a class that was taught by Donald Pinkava. It was called Arizona Flora. And that class literally changed my life. This is little note cards that I made that were required that I still have. You can see 1972. And at the time, too, Rodney Engard, he was a student and also worked at the garden. And he heard that Dr. Gentry needed an artist, an illustrator, to finish up his own monograph. And so he took me sight unseen. And I ended up doing a lot of work, doing a lot of illustrations of the species, did all his rain silhouettes and his maps, and it was a wonderful experience. And this was published, of course, in this wonderful book that is so important, and it will continue to be an important reference, Diaries of Continental North America. And apparently, though, in this picture, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I knew I wanted to study agaves. And this gentleman, Rick Delamater, who's a very dear friend of mine, and he really did a lot to encourage me as well in pursuing agaves. Unfortunately, he passed away at a very young age. And as you'll see, one of the agaves is named for Rick. Um, Liz Slauson, she was our curator of the living collection and director of research. She studied agave pollination and published in Arizona Journal of Botany. Gary Nabhan, who many of you might know, he was our assistant director of the botanical garden and very interested in agaves, and he continues to do a lot of work with agaves. And of course, now Andrew Salomon, who joined the garden staff about 18 years ago, and he's working with me quite a bit on agaves, including doing a lot of molecular DNA work. So let's talk about agaves. They're known by many names, and the misnomer century plant, but also Hispanic and Native American, Aun Vial. They are, and it hurts me to say this, they've been pulled out of its own family and now are in the subfamily Agavoideae in the very, very large asparagus family. There's a lot of species and a lot of subspecies. Currently, depending on who you talk to, recognize about 250 taxa, species, subspecies, varieties. And you can see the range. It's quite a large range, all the way down to the Caribbean. Greatest diversity is in central Mexico, and that's believed to be the center of origin, where you have a really high percentage of agaves found only in this region. It's believed that they may have originated about 10 plus million years ago, give or take a few, and they are very successful in expanding into arid and semi-arid regions, and of course playing really important ecological roles in these ecosystems. Most agave are what we call monocarpic or multi-annual, which I don't really like that term, in that it produces its flower stalk from the apical meristem or the growing point so that it can't grow anymore, so that the rosette will die after flowering. They rely on sexual reproduction. They will produce seeds, but many of them also do vegetative reproduction. And that's through little plants from under or above ground stems. And we call them pups. Also, some will produce little bulbils or plantlets from the flower stalk. Many, if you damage the stalk, they'll often produce little bulbils too. They try to do it every which way they can. Many are self-incompatible. They aren't able to fertilize with pollen from the same flower or plant. This really still needs to do a lot of work because it's sort of a generalized statement, but we still need to look at specific species. There's a, to be so to do so well in arid, semi-arid regions, they've evolved a lot of very cool adaptive traits. For example, as you go from south to north in latitude, because of the aridity, they become smaller, and you can see the comparison here of two agaves. Also, these various adaptive traits, shallow roots, of course, leaf and stem succulents, but one that I think is really cool, and again, this needs a lot more research too, is many, it seems, that undergoes what we call CAM photosynthesis. Many succulents, cacti will do this kind of photosynthesis where they open their stomates on the cue of cooling temperatures. They'll open the stomates at night, and that's where they exchange gases, bring in CO2. And so you have water loss that's really reduced, being that the stomates are open at night. So the gases are stored and during the day, and then regular photosynthesis continues. It's a really cool adaptation. And again, we need to look at a lot more agaves to see if they all do CAM photosynthesis. This is an adaptation I find very interesting. Uh, the agaves produce a unique kind of prebiotic. It's called the fructan, and it's called agavin. This is the main carbohydrate stored in the plants when it's about ready to flower. And researchers found that the plants beneficial to plants because it protects them from dehydration, drought, or freezing. And what's cool about it too is when you eat these plants, For people, that it decreases triglyceride, cholesterol, and glucose levels. So let's keep all this in mind because we'll talk a little bit about this later. So in Arizona, we have 16 wild taxa, species, variety, subspecies. 6 are domesticated in Arizona. And so we have 15 that are found only in Arizona. So Arizona does have the most number of agave species in the US. And we have some undescribed agaves that Andrew and I and others are working on as well. So when you talk with people, agave is so important to indigenous people, to people throughout Mexico, a long history, of course, but to the indigenous people, agave is life. My friend Phil Daring called agaves the buffalo of the region. I really like that because it really shows the importance of these plants. Of course, the agaves provide fiber for all sorts of things, and of course the beverages, the fermented pulque, and the distilled kinds of mezcal. Many other values and uses too. But one of the most main use for agaves is for food, and we believe that agaves have been used for food for up to 10,000 years. And what was used was, you see the emerging stalk on the left, and this plant is storing up a lot of complex carbohydrates, again, mostly in the form of those fructans. Here's another, and it already is showing signs of flowering. So the people knew, number one, which ones to harvest for food, but also the time of harvesting as well. And so all the leaves would be cut off and then pit baked anywhere from 1 to 4 days, depending on the species. And what you have is, because of the slow pit baking, it hydrolyzes, it breaks down those complex carbohydrates into a very sweet substance. In this case, a lot of it being fructose, because you break down fructans, it'll break down into fructose. And so you have these really tasty, sweet food source, the leaf bases, as well as the central part of the agave. And it could be eaten as is, or importantly, could be stored for future use. So these are all the edible agaves in the Sonoran Desert, important to all the groups who had access through them through harvesting and trade. Very nutritious food, you can see, providing all the calcium, fiber, fructans, of course, etc. I love this. Dr. Gentry at a talk in San Diego said, agaves in humans. This was mutualism by two very disparate organisms. In no other compacted form can one find so many elements of human comfort and civilization. Man nurtured agave, and agave nurtured man. In Mexico, we have about 20 agave species that were cultivated that are not known from the wild. And this is important too, that cultivation has persisted for centuries without being interrupted. What about the borderlands region and the area northern Mexico into today's US? Were they even important? A lot of people thought they weren't. They're survival food, even though there's a lot of ethnographic information out there that says, no, they were important. And one thing too, there was very little, if any, data on possible pre-contact or pre-Columbian cultivation, despite the fact that agaves, they do really well in really crummy soils, and they're very reliable. Even when you have droughts um, or crop failures, you can depend on the wild agaves. Well, there's several studies. Susie and Paul Fish, Charles Madsen, and Charles Mixerchek they're archaeologists, and they did some really cool work in Phoenix area, as well as in Marana, which is just northwest of Tucson. And within their study areas, which covered hundreds of acres, they found evidence that supported extensive agave cultivation by the Hohokam. The Hohokam inhabited the region from about 250 to 1450 AD. They would find things like hundreds of these rock piles in the upper right. The plant was planted in the middle of the rock pile. Rock piles are believed to keep moisture in, build up soils, moderate heat in the summer, and then keeping the plants warmer in winter, and possibly to deterring gopher activity. And you'll see an agave knife, and then you'll see these marginal teeth that are found in the roasting pits. So this was the first evidence of extensive agave cultivation by pre-contact people, I mean, people, in this case, the Hohokam. But the closest documented agave occurred about today anyways, is 16 kilometers from the fields. And we don't see any agaves in their study fields. Closest one, 16 kilometers away. So they wondered if they grew plants that were transported from Mexico. Well, this is where we got really interested in what agaves were people, including the Hohokam, growing, cultivating. And do they still exist? I love this artwork by Scott Siebel. It shows how on the floodplains they were growing the beans, corn, squash, and then on these hills with the thin soils and all, showing the rock piles growing the agaves. But keep in mind too, there are a lot of variations on this thing, but I just really like this artwork. So wild agaves, were wild agaves cultivated? So Paul Minnis and Stephen Plog didn't really say they were cultivated, but they would find these agave Perry's agave, which is wild, in association with archaeological features along the Mogollon Rim. And my buddy Kathy Parker looked at that further and said, indeed, these plants, and doing some molecular analysis, showed that these were cultivated, and the source of the plants weren't directly from there, but from an area farther away. And then if you go down to southeastern Arizona, you have the Huachuca agave. And again, Kathy Parker's work has showed where you have two different forms. You have the wild form that occurred up in the mountains, and then this lowland form that you find around Sonoyta and other areas in the grasslands, and with evidence, strong evidence that they were cultivated. So we called it the anthropogenic form. So we do have evidence that wild agaves were tended to on some level or cultivated. But during the 70s, when the agave murphyi, which was described, I think, in 1937, people were noticing that, this agave is found near archaeological sites. Maybe people cultivated this one as well. And this is a map. You can see the ones that still exist in Arizona, in the wild, so to speak, central Arizona. And then you find them like in cells on the Altam Reservation and in little ranches in Mexico. And so we believe that this agave was not only cultivated, but is actually a domesticate. This plant was domesticated by early people. And what we see today are remnants of these plants that were farmed extensively by pre-contact people, in this case, the Hohokam. And we lovingly call this a PCAD, a pre-contact agave domesticate. And you can see these rock piles. This is just east of Phoenix. And you'll find processing tools, agave processing tools with it. And in some areas, you still find the murphyi, the plants, in the rock pile. Well, while Rick was looking for murphyi sites, he happened onto this weird agave that was also found in archaeological sites. It was in Tonto Basin. And Rick passed away, and so Liz Lawson and I, we determined it was a new species, not only a new species, but it was a new PCAD. And so we named it in memory of Rick, Agave delamateri. Well, it turns out that it's not restricted to Tonto Basin. And again, with Kathy Parker's work showed that it was traded, and we do find plants in Verde Valley as well. And they were indeed traded by different cultures. In this case, Hohokam with Sinawa. So that's pretty cool. Well, the story continues. My buddy Art Phillips, who does a lot of work in Grand Canyon, he tells me of this weird agave that's found in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I said, great. And so he gave me directions and I found it. and like the others, found in an archaeological setting and agricultural features around it, and new to science. So I wanted to recognize art, and so we called it Agave phillipsiana, the Grand Canyon agave. So another pecan. And for a while, it was only known from the Grand Canyon, but lo and behold, with more searches, it's found throughout the Verde Valley area, especially the Sedona area. It's still rare, just as the other ones are, but has a little wider distribution. It's found along the Hassayampa River, south of Prescott, and in Tano Basin as well. So you have a plant that was traded, that was grown by different cultures in different climates, different habitat. And I think this is really interesting and deserves a lot more study. Here it is in Tano Basin. And a hot spot too for agave pecans. Well, looking for those plants, we've happened to find another one that I knew was different, and Andrew and I named it Verdensis. It's named for its namesake, Sacred Mountain agave in Verde Valley, uh, in Sinawa homeland, the culture. And they inhabited that area pretty much the same time as the Hohokam. And unlike the other ones, there's no evidence suggests that they were traded extensively, maybe locally, but for some reasons, these were kept close to home. And so this is our fourth pecan, the Sacred Mountain agave. Not too far and often growing with this is another one that we determined is different. And this is the Yavapai agave, named for the Yavapai tribe, and we call it Agave yavapaensis. And like Verdensis, the Sacred Mountain one, there is little, if any, evidence of extensive trade with this one. So again, for reasons unbeknownst to us, we have some ideas that they kept it close to home. Moving down to southeastern Arizona, this is a beautiful area along the San Pedro River. And archaeologists with Archaeology Southwest, they mapped all the agricultural features, pre-contact features within 60 miles of this, along 60 miles of the San Pedro, within about a mile of each on each side. And they had the wherewithal, thank goodness, to map agaves if they found them. This area is amazing. It has these beautiful rock terraces. These are man-made features. These are agricultural features by pre-contact peoples. And they would be growing different plants. And again, you have direction of water runoff, accumulation of water. So these are enhancing and improving the habitat. You have these huge rock piles that archaeologists are still unsure of. These are really huge. We're not sure, but you do also find the smaller ones and rock piles. This is an agave that we found with the help of folks at Archaeology Southwest, and it's found right in the middle of these terraces. And because it's found along the San Pedro, because it's new, it's different from any other agave. Molecular showed it as well. It supports that. We called it this agave San Pedroensis, or the San Pedro agave. Indeed, that agave that was closest to the Marana agave fields is this one that's 16 kilometers away. So no doubt they were probably growing San Pedroensis in those big fields, as well as Murphyii, as well as others that we may never know that have become extinct. Are there other domesticates? Absolutely. This is one on the left that looks a lot like the Grand Canyon or Phillipsiana, but it's different. And we will name it as another pecan, but we need more material, more flowering material. Further south, is another agave. It looks a lot like Palmer's agave, which is the wild one, but again, molecular and some morphological indicating that it is different, found with agricultural features from pre-contact people. So it's pretty interesting. This site I loved especially. This is west of Sedona. You can see the wild agave, Agave perryi here. And right next to it is a beautiful habitation, multi-room habitation site. Well, you look more along this outcrop, we find the sacred mountain agave, Agave verdensis, and the Grand Canyon one, Agave phillipsiana. What's really interesting is this one. We don't know what it is. It's one that to me looks like a hybrid origin between the sacred mountain verdensis and the wild perii. We don't know. We're doing work on this. We're investigating this. And so, to answer questions if indeed it is of hybrid origin, is it a recent hybrid origin, or can it be something that, because again of this offsetting, has just persisted for a very long time that pre-contact people created as well? We don't know. So there's a lot of evidence supporting their cultivation and domestication. The very fact that they're closely associated with archaeological features like the rock piles and the terraces, the processing tools, the knives to cut the base of the leaf, and these scrapers that scrape off the tissue so it exposes fiber too. Remember, they're using plants for fiber as well as other uses too. They're often found, not always, but most of the time, found near field houses, dwellings, and roasting pits. And you find these, what we call macrobotanical remains, the marginal teeth or spines or quids. Quids are when you eat the heart or the leaf bases, you have all this fiber in your mouth and you spit it out. And those are what we call quids. And archaeologists are really excited, so are we, about quids because they can date them. So there's some other ideas too that we have for using of quids. So I won't get into now, but you'll hear about them at another time. This is another suggestion of why they're domesticated. Very often in domesticated species of plants, you have an increase in ploidy level. We're all diploids. We have two sets of chromosomes, right, mom and dad. And so with plants, you have diploid as well, but polyploids, it can be three times the number, four times the number. Very often when you do find them, like in important cultivated plants, you find a relationship where maybe the plants are sweeter, the whatever you're harvesting is bigger. We don't know, we can't tie in the reasons of polyploidy with the agaves yet, but there are folks that are working on this. 3 of our pecads are polyploids. So when you get a long interaction of humans and agaves, you're going to see changes in the plants. And so they're going to produce very little or no fertile seed or fruits, and they're relying a lot on human care. And so they reproduce a lot, not exclusively, but a lot on asexual reproduction. And that's, remember, the formation of pups, etc., and the little bulbils that you see in Agave murphyi. By the way, on one stalk of murphyi, it can produce up to 300 of these little plantlets. So what a great way to increase the number, or maybe use for trading as well. So when you have vegetative reproduction, you're going to get relative uniform morphology, and you're also going to get low genetic variability. And so when we see within each species, there's not a lot of variability morphologically. But again, you're going to have low genetic variability. They probably selected for certain traits. We'd notice, for example, every one of them, they cut like butter when you cut the base of the leaf. So they could have been selecting plants that had easily cut leaves. Obviously, the sweetest, we've done 2 roasting events up in Verde Valley, and both times hundreds of people voted on the sweetest, and they voted the domesticated species to be sweeter than the wild species. Shorter life cycles. With wild species, depending on which one, it can vary anywhere from 12 to 40 plus years for them to mature and flower. Remember, that's when you're going to harvest them for food. And so they probably bred for shorter life cycles. Anecdotal information, we know murphyi, and actually there's been some study with supplemental watering. You can get murphyi to mature in 7 to 8 years. Anecdotally, we've watched San Pedro mature very quickly within 9 years. And of course, drought. The one on the left, this is the same plant, by the way. 2020, it was a tough year. Drought, high temperatures, and I really thought this murphyi clone, this was up by Lake Pleasant, was going to die. And I went back in 2023. We had a lot of rain. It was really good. Look at it. It looks like a totally different plant. And Murphy is probably the most drought resistant. I also think too harvesting and flowering time. So, and the pink indicates a approximate harvest time of the heart of the plant, and the green is the flowering period. The wild ones are at the top, and then the domesticated ones are on the bottom. When you add Murphy into the mix, when you're growing Murphy, you've really extended your harvest time because it does bloom in the spring, so you can harvest the plants in late winter, which is often a pretty tough time for acquiring fresh foods. And then when you add Della Materai and Flipsiana, the Tonto Basin Grand Canyon ones, uh, that also adds to the harvesting time, especially in areas where Agave palmeri, which is a summer bloomer as well, doesn't occur. And two, this is a beautiful site overlooking Oak Creek. You have three of the pecans growing here. Verdensis, the Grand Canyon, and Delamateri. And we need to remember too that these agaves, they could have been selecting, favoring one species for fiber and one for food. Um, but there are areas where we find more than one of these pecans growing. So the question, how do you fix these traits? And the best way is through vegetative reproduction with the production of these pups. And Gentry knew this. He noted how really easy it is that you can perpetuate all these different kinds through vegetative reproduction, all these different genetic variants, very relatively quickly too. What's really cool for us is that because they're offsetting, right? We can look at these plants today in their cultural, agricultural context, and pretty much those plants are the same that they were growing back then and when they terminated taking care of these plants. These plants kept growing. So this provides a really cool opportunity to study their biocultural and archaeological context so that we can able to trace their genetic lineage to their and to their pre-contact cultivated or their wild ancestors. This can also help us understand how they manage these crops because this is very complicated. And we're just starting to look at this. Again, my good buddy Kathy Parker, she did a study, and the results of her study indicated that their farming methods growing these pecans were similar to how traditional farmers grow crops in Mexico, where they did all these various things. They cultivated several varieties, and this is really important. They allowed some to flower and cross-pollinate, and then, of course, trading seeds and suckers. We have to keep in mind that what we're seeing today is a tiny snapshot of what was going on at that time. We've probably lost a lot of the plants that were variants, that had more genetic variability, but for some reason, these ones that we're seeing today were able to persist all these centuries, okay? So, because the question is too, is you don't want them all to be the same. You don't want them to be a monoculture like the tequila agave where a pest could wipe them all out. They knew how to do it. They were doing things to increase the genetic diversity, but not so much that they couldn't fix the traits, which is really pretty incredible feat to do. But what happened? So you had a decrease in Hohokam and other cultures, populations post 1450. So that meant they couldn't take care of the plants, so you lost a lot of them. And that further eroded that genetic variation and then resulting in this decrease in near extinction of all the agaves that they once cultivated. So what we're seeing today are remnants of populations and species that were in once extensively farmed areas. So this transformed these big, vast areas or small areas that were intensely cultivated. These cultivated landscapes were changed to what we see today as their modern, what we would call natural landscape. But are they natural? Up in our Free National Monument, that's the monument that was made such because of all the incredible archaeological features. And this is what we call a biocultural landscape. This area was farmed. It was changed by people. I was told it's not the Hohokam, but the ancestral Puebloan people, hundreds of years ago. What you see here is a wild agave, and you can see it growing amidst these man-made terraces. And all that green here is little barley, Hordeum pusillum. Hordeum pusillum was a species that the Hohokam did domesticate at one time. So let's go farther east towards Safford. This is towards the New Mexico Arizona border. These are called the Safford Grids. Amazing. These are little waffle gardens. These were constructed, archaeologists believe, for, again, building up soil, retaining moisture to grow agaves, as well as probably intercropping. We've gone out there in the summer, and it's covered with portulaca, purslane, which is a very nutritious edible green, or quelite. I live in South Phoenix, and for years I've overlooked these. This is the South Mountain Agave Terraces that are you can see a parking lot and above left there. Unfortunately, it was in the middle of these extensive terraces here. Um, it's by the 48th Street trailhead in South Mountain Park. And archaeologists believe they were growing not only agaves, but also cotton. And you can imagine little Murphy eyes and as well as some other species growing there. I visited them recently and they're getting washed out. It's gotten even harder to see these. So just to recap a little bit, agaves in Arizona represent the extreme northern periphery of the range of the whole genus. And this is really important, I think, keeping in mind accessibility to useful agaves. Again, 22 species, 15 are found only in Arizona. 6 of those 15 are domesticates, excuse me. On the left, you have your wild agaves that were edible. On the right, look how many more that we know now, when we include the PCADs, the pre-contact domesticated ones. And again, there are probably many more that we'll never know. One of the questions, where they come from and from whom? It's very easy to think that they came from Mesoamerica, Central Mexico, just like corn, beans, and squash and other Hohokam cultivated plants. They came from there. But we remember Hordeum, the little barley that was domesticated here in what we call today's Arizona. And there are other examples as well, too, that were domesticated here and not Mesoamerica. So looking at the PCADs, this is the work that Andrew did with the molecular, looking at DNA and all. And first off, there are 3 distinct lineages. Murphyii did not begot Delamateri, did not begot Phillipsiana, et cetera, et cetera. There are 3 very distinct lineages. None are from Mesoamerica. That's cool. Who do they show affinities with? Delamateri, Phillipsiana, and San Pedroensis show affinities, close affinities with the wild agave palmeri of southern Arizona. Very cool. What about Verdensis and Yavapaensis? Even cooler. The work is showing that these 2 are closely related, first off, and they have close affinities with the wild Auafria agave, as well as wild agaves that we've been calling Agave chrysantha up in the Verde Valley area. This is very exciting. Another finding is strongly suggesting that they did originate just, hundreds of years ago. They originated because of the long branches that are showing up in the molecular on the tree, right? They originated a very long time ago, even probably pre-Hohokam, which really adds a lot to this story. It adds a lot of questions, is what it adds. And that the borderlands region is an important overlooked area of domestication. How are they doing? What are their threats? They're not doing very well. They're rare and they are not doing well. There's a number of factors that are playing into it. Climate issues, of course, are exacerbating so much other things too. And you can see on the right, Delamateri, it's down to 0 plants now over the years. Fires, of course, these agaves do not do well with fires. And so how do we mitigate threats and save populations of PCADs? This is complicated. It's a very unique situation. There's a lot of laws that protect domesticated animals, but domesticated plant species there aren't any uh, laws. And domesticated species are not covered or assessed under the Endangered Species Act. For IUCN, the International Union of Conservation of Nature, we can't assess them because they're human values and manipulated. So that's a problem. There is some protection. The Forest Service and BLM list them as sensitive species, but their hands are tied too. There's not a lot of that they can do. They support our work greatly, but as far as protection, there's not a whole lot. U.S. and Arizona Antiquities Acts, again, limited protection, permits required. You know, a lot of people may not get permits and may collect them illegally. You know, Martha Burgess, a good buddy of mine, a wonderful ethnobotanist, she posed the question in this paper, should not these and other rare cultural species be more protected? And that, you know, these plants have been around with people for hundreds of years. Should they not be given more protection? And that poses that question too, what is a natural or pristine environment? When you go up to Agua Fria and you look at those sites, you're seeing the legacies of what people did years and years and years ago. What they did so long ago affects plant composition, what species are there, abundance of plants, etc. So what really is a natural environment, especially when you're looking at it from a cultural perspective in areas where it experience a lot of cultural activities. So my good buddy Gary Nabhan and Octaviana Trujillo, they talked with many, many elders from many tribes. And they're concerned about the lack of protection of sacred and ceremonial plants that occur on public lands. And with the talking with so many folks and with their own expertise and all, they came up with this publication. It's called Sacred Plant Biocultural Recovery Initiative. And that is, as you can read here, it's providing better protection, stronger protection for plants and plant sites that are culturally, religiously, ritually, spiritually important to indigenous people. And one of the important things here too is to recognize the intrinsic right to exist as quote unquote persons because they are part of this heritage or their heritage of cultures and faiths from around the planet. So such designation and attention to these relationships can protect plant species and the landscapes. And this has become really insignificant, especially now, because the government is mandated to protect freedom of religion. And so this includes the Borderlands region. So you all know there's been a lot going on along the borderland with the wall, right? And this beautiful artwork depicting a Tohono O'odham woman, this is based on a true story that Gary shared, and that they walked with Tohono O'odham elders to the wall, and they all were just heartbroken. And one woman cried and looked up to the people and says, "Do you not understand that these plants are people?" And so from this initiative begun, and I think you're going to hear more. I hope you're going to hear much more about this. So collaboration is key, working with indigenous peoples, traditional farmers, um, working, of course, with academia. You know, it's a no-brainer, right? But for so long, botanists didn't work with archaeologists and all. That's changed. Working, of course, with federal agencies and community science. We really need to find all these populations and possibly even more undescribed PCADs. So we're working with community sciences, conservation organizations, the forests, of course, who have been very, very supported. We work with Saguaro National Park and the Tohono youth in finding additional potential PCADs, mapping out the agaves as well as archaeological sites. Really great program. There's in situ care too of both the PCADs and their wild progenitors. Okay, we do have the crop wild relatives programs, and so this would follow. This wild agave would be a crop wild relative, but we need to take care of them in situ, and that is a bit challenging. I'm really happy to say that just recently we're developing a program, Grand Canyon National Park, with various tribes, including Wallapai and the Southern Paiute Consortium involved with DBG. And how do we protect in situ these plants in Grand Canyon? And one point I want to make that I've learned this, our idea of conserving plants may be very different from indigenous people's perspective of say, of conserving plants. And that was brought to my attention when working up in Lake Pleasant when a tribal liaison archaeologist told me such. And she said that, you know, their idea of their perception of conserving and taking care of the plants, maybe letting the plant go back to Mother Earth. And I'm like, oh, okay. And but fortunately, they were all when working with various like tribes, 13 tribes, they were all like, let's keep the plants growing and perpetuating. So we want to have for Wallapai, Southern Paiute, in taking in situ care and taking care, stewarding these plants in Grand Canyon National Park. There's ex situ care too, bringing in pups. We don't like taking pups from these archaeological, from these cultural contexts, right? Unless we absolutely have to. If the plants, the clone or population looks like they're going to die, we will take them. But we've also done tissue culture. This is Luis Romero, garden staff, and we've worked with Huntington Botanical Garden in doing this. And here we have little Agave Sampajoensis, which is the rarest of all the PCADs. And hopefully we can put them back to their original sites. But again, working with indigenous folks in doing that. So in the last, I'm going to finish up here. In the last 20 years especially, agave, people have really gotten interested in agaves big time, including in the Southwest in the US. And you hear a lot about growing on large scale agaves for forage, fiber, medicine, biofuel, textiles, food, and of course for making mezcal. And there is a big drive to interest in the Southwest to grow agaves for making mezcal, making them signature mezcals, growing from really unique agaves. There has been talk and interest in growing our PCADs for mezcal, which I will say right now, we totally discourage. We will not let that happen. And when I say we, it's also tribal folks are not for that as well. They are special. They are special plants that that we want to bring back to keep growing and keep saving, you know, preserve them in their cultural context, but also having them be more part of the indigenous folks. They have a direct tie with them. But one of the things that struck me was, okay, food. This shows promise, okay? And you know agave syrup. You may have bought it, may use it. And there has been some controversy around it. A positive thing about agave syrup, it does result in low glycemic indices. Okay, but there's other issues though. So you have to be careful on how much you use. Because if you convert fructans, those agave fructans you're going to convert it into fructose. Fructose is fructose is fructose. It's not any more natural than fruit juice concentrate or high fructose corn syrup. And so if you think that, well, it has these positive, like low glycemic indices, I can take more. Well, that leads to issues as well. You don't want to take so much. And It's not the same as agave, the agavian, the fructan. Agave syrup fructose is not the same as the prebiotic that is beneficial to plants and people. So I got to thinking more about this. I mean, this is a challenge for indigenous people. You know, they have a really high type 2 diabetes rate. You know, they had to shift. They were forced to shift from traditional diet to more Western diet. And that really messed up their whole systems. And so, but here you have a sweet, really sweet food that has been used for centuries and really important plant, not only as a food, but also for cultural, for ritual, a very sacred plant to the people. Well, how about if we bring that, encourage use of that for the production of a sweet food? We know that ultra processing removes all the health benefits of agave, but what about traditional pit baking? Does that remove all the healthful benefits? And it turns out, no, it doesn't. It doesn't convert all the fructans into fructose, so you are getting the benefits of the plants. Wouldn't it be cool and this is just these wild ideas that we have now. We want to present it to indigenous folks to bring the plants back to the community so that they can continue their traditions because it's not, again, not just food. It is a ritual, it's cultural, spiritual plants. But at the same time, doing their pit roasting of the agaves and result in a really good, nutritious, more nutritious, sweet food. So I thinking about this more and more, I think this would be really cool. And again, doing these roasts, it's very important culturally. It brings people together. It reinforces the cultural ties with the people. So I want to end with this. You can't do conservation without um, indigenous peoples. And again, throughout the talk, I've talked about uses. Well, it's more than uses. It's the relationship that the indigenous people had with the plants and their landscapes, the spiritual, communal, cultural. These are things that are hard for us Western scientists to study. It's much more easier to study the more tangible usage, utilitarian uses of plants. And so that's why another reason of many that we need to bring the indigenous folks to the table and into the field, collaborate with them, because they can share this much more holistic, whole perspective and relationships with the plants. And this can help us conserve individual plants as well as landscapes and help us restore, do a lot of restoration and restoring landscapes. And finally, when they say prayers, they will say all my relations in their prayer. And it's not just their immediate family when they include in their prayers. They also include their ancestors. They also include the plants, the animals, the water, the sky. And so when I look at these PCADs, these are a direct connection to their ancestors. And they're excited. They want to work with us more. And I think it's a really unique, very, very cool um, I don't want to say project, but involvement in involving folks and all, in answering a lot of questions and all. So I want to end with that. Um, and if there are if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer. But thank you so much again.